On April 12th, 1861, 160 years ago, the Brothers' War began. Fort Sumter has become a symbol of federal authority, beloved in the North and detested in the South, and despite Lincoln's inauguration speech and its promise, Lincoln's cabinet is split on what to do. Lincoln personally wants to take no offensive action but maintain all federal property that has not been captured so far. His plan is to send his brother-in-law, Navy Lieutenant Gustavus Fox, with a flotilla of gunboats and tugboats, firepower provided by the USS Powhatan and her 16 guns, to break through the blockade and reinforce Anderson at the fort. However, General Scott has said that the reinforcement of Sumter was possible given the artillery cover provided by the Confederates. This plan is presented to the cabinet on March 15th, and Secretary of State William Seward finds the plan absolutely repulsive. He says that the administration must adopt a reconciliatory posture. Secretary of State Salmon Chase says that a reinforcement of the fort would lead to all-out warfare, and said that the states which have already seceded must be allowed to go. Secretary of War Simon Cameron considered the surrender of the fort inevitable, and voted no. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles said it would cause tension and voted no. Only the Postmaster General, Montgomery Blair, gave an unreserved yes. The feeling in the cabinet can be summed up, therefore, as, to keep Virginia in the Union, Sumter must be surrendered, but Fort Pickens in Florida, facing a similar crisis, must be held, because it doesn't have the same PR quality. But a week later, when General Scott issued a statement that the forts must be surrendered, the cabinet changed their minds. Scott had said, quote, "The evacuation of both the forts would instantly soothe and give confidence to the 8 remaining slaveholding states and render their cordial adherence to this union perpetual. Both Sumter and Pickens had to go." Now, this statement was made for political reasons, and it cast doubt on Scott's first assessment that reinforcement was impossible. If it was impossible, then there would be nothing to gain from their concession to the Confederacy. In the assessment of the cabinet, this time Scott is now discredited, and the cabinet voted to reinforce Sumter under Fox's plan. The flotilla, under the command of Lieutenant Gustavus Fox, is poorly coordinated and does not depart all at the same time, and the USS Powhatan is already on a mission relieving Fort Pickens, and so it can't be recalled in time. Fox arrived at Fort Sumter on the 12th at about 3 a.m., and the rest of the relief flotilla trickled in throughout the day, and the USS Powhatan never arrived, so the necessary firepower to break into the harbor was never achieved, and so what happens next cannot be prevented by Fox or the state. After refusing an ultimatum to surrender on the 11th, on the 12th of April 1861, Confederate forces under the command of Brigadier General P.G.T. Beauregard opened fire with artillery pieces at Fort Sumter. The Union forces returned fire, and an artillery duel in Charleston Harbor heralds the beginning of the American Civil War. While the shelling is prolonged and dramatic, nobody is killed in the actual combat. The first victim is the flagstaff carrying the Union flag, and its sudden disappearance led the Confederates to cease their shelling and attempt to contact the defenders on the 13th. Also seeing the flag disappear, Fox's relief force sent a boat to investigate. Anderson surrendered the fort, and his detachment sailed away with the relief force. The war has begun. By the way, the reinforcement of Fort Pickens in Florida was successful, and U.S. Marines stormed the beaches and secured the fort for the Union. On April 14th, Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to serve a 3-month enlistment to quell the rebellion. March into the South and end it all quickly and easily. We'll not only be home for Christmas, we'll be home for the 4th of July. He also calls Congress to an emergency session to begin on July 4th, just in case the rebellion is not suppressed by then. However, in the South, the southern states that have not seceded are shocked by this call to arms against their fellow Southerners, and Lincoln's call to arms drives the remainder into the Confederate camp, and we will see them secede over the coming weeks and months. This also prompts a wave of resignations and desertions throughout the Marine Corps, Army, and Navy. On the 17th, Virginia secedes, and this puts D.C. in immediate danger from right across the Potomac River. Federal troops and Union militias are summoned from across the U.S. to protect D.C. They begin arriving the following day. In the same session, the Congress passes a call inviting all Virginians currently in the U.S. Army to defect and join the Virginian Army. They also authorize an office of the Commander-in-Chief and begin looking for generals to fill it. That same day, Jefferson Davis authorizes privateering, and he states that the CSA is prepared to issue letters of marque, the first of which is signed April 22nd. On the 19th, the 6th Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry Regiment, en route to D.C., was attacked by a crowd of Southern sympathizers and secessionists in Baltimore. 4 soldiers and 12 civilians are killed. This event galvanizes the North, particularly in Ohio, which immediately raises an 800-man regiment in response, the 6th Ohio Guthrie Grays. Also, in a move that according to some is the most decisive of the war and ensuring the Confederacy could not win, Lincoln orders on the 19th the Navy to blockade all Confederate ports. The Atlantic Naval Squadron, currently 25 ships crewed by 3,500 sailors and Marines, commanded by Commodore Silas Norton Stringham, flagship USS Minnesota, moves to enact this. However, the squadron suffers from defections of crew, Marines, and some entire ships. The following day, the 20th, Robert E. Lee resigns his commission. Lee was not a secessionist, but was unable to imagine taking up arms against Virginia. He accepts the offer from the Virginia government to be its commander-in-chief. In other news, Confederate forces strike and capture Norfolk. The departing Union troops burn 9 warships so that they cannot be captured. Approximately 3,000 cannons are seized, and these will serve as the backbone for the burgeoning Confederate Navy. The ships also only burn to the waterline. The underwater portions of the ships are still intact, and one of these hulls, formerly that of the USS Merrimack, is requisitioned for use in an experiment in shipbuilding. On the 27th, Lincoln expands the blockade to include all ports in Virginia and authorizes General Scott to suspend habeas corpus in Maryland. On the 29th, the Provisional Confederate Congress convenes for its second session, and the Congress of Maryland rejects secession 53-13. Maryland not seceding is absolutely crucial, because otherwise D.C. would be completely cut off, and these will govern the relationships between the federal government and Maryland through the next months and years. If Maryland secedes, the war is over. But this is not just the story of a nation, or of 2 warring nations. This is also the story of the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry Regiment, whose history we will be following for the duration of their service. Their story, too, begins this month 160 years ago. On 9 a.m. on the 15th, Governor Ramsey from Minnesota went out to meet his friend, the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron. He caught him about to walk to the White House, telling him, quote, "I simply want to tender you 1,000 men to help defend the country and suppress this treason." An offer which was accepted. This would make Minnesota the first state to offer troops to the federal government, and although this story sounds like apocrypha, it has actually never been contested. On the same day Maryland refused secession, 10 companies assembled in Fort Snelling. 10 companies, 899 enlisted men plus officers. After assembling, mustering into companies, and learning how to march, the men were sworn in as soldiers, directed by Captain Nelson. The term of enlistment was 3 months. The first colonel, that is the commander of the regiment, was Willis Arnold Gorman, the lieutenant colonel was Stephen Miller, and the major was William H. Dyke. Gorman appointed the remainder of the staff officers, the quartermaster and the surgeon and the like. Gorman was a career officer, born in Kentucky in 1816, moving at a young age to Indiana and becoming a lawyer. He served with distinction at the 3rd Indiana Infantry in Mexico and was severely wounded at Buena Vista. He would go on to command the 4th Indiana in that war. He serves as a U.S. representative from Indiana from 1838 to 1852, meaning he was front and center for the Compromise of 1850. In 1853, he was appointed governor of Minnesota by President Pierce. When he took command of the 1st, he was 45 years old. The Lieutenant Colonel Miller was a Republican newspaper editor from Pennsylvania, and Major Dyke was a Democrat from Vermont. Gorman and the 1st would busy themselves with military education, mainly drill of Hardee's Tactics Manual. The men received their arms. For the most part, the first-rate Springfield 1861 percussion rifled musket, but some would keep their militia-issue Mississippi rifles, which later would be replaced with a 69 caliber 1842 Springfield rifle. No man had a flintlock or a smoothbore, for which the 1st Minnesota could call itself lucky. As for uniforms, courtesy of the state of Minnesota, every enlisted man was provided with a woolen shirt, most were red, black felt hat, black pants, a single pair of socks, and a blanket, in addition to the clothing the individual soldiers brought, of course. Company K had gray uniforms presented to them by the citizens of Winona. The state then provided substantial cooking utensils, but not personal mess kits. Those were provided by the men. Days of drill, fraternizing with the ladies of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and early military experience would always be looked back on fondly by the men of the 1st. On the last day of April, Colonel Gorman notified Governor Ramsey that the regiment, 950 men strong, was fully mustered and waiting for orders. And that concludes the first episode of the regular series. The Union and Confederate armies and governments are laying plans and attempting to outmaneuver each other. Few shots have been fired and few soldiers have been killed, most of them by accidents or riots. Both sides are currently only preparing for a short engagement. The scale and scope and really the reality of the situation is currently unknown. But thanks for watching. If you liked it, give it a like. If you didn't, a dislike. In the comments, you can leave suggestions for special episodes, questions for the Q&A, and whatever else you'd like to put there. Please be sure to share this video with the history buff in your life, and I'll see you next time, where since the Confederacy has moved its capital to Richmond, Virginia, mere miles from D.C., a very clear objective has been placed before the Union's eyes, and a plan of action will be decided.